before we recite the verse of refuge and bodhicitta, then maybe it's good to spend a few moments just to try to generate the motivation, bodhicitta, at the beginning of any meditation session or teaching session, or any activity or any day when we wake up from sleep. It's very important to generate a positive motivation, so that all the actions that follow through the force of that motivation become virtuous actions, and thereby become a source of happiness for ourselves and others. One way to generate bodhicitta motivation is to just briefly think about all the topics in the Lamrim. I know some of you might not be familiar with this, but for those who are familiar, then maybe it's helpful. If you're not familiar with the Lamrim, then it's just try to generate the aspiration that whatever I'm doing here now, may it be beneficial to myself and beneficial to all my family, friends, all sentient beings. But if you're familiar with the Lamrim, then try to think, bring to mind, first of all, how fortunate we are to have taken this human rebirth, endowed with health, some mental clarity, and supportive friendships, and especially access to the Buddha's teachings, and an inclination to give some attention to learning about and trying to put into practice the Buddha's teachings in our own life. So thinking how rare and fortunate we are to have this human rebirth. And then not only that, but this opportunity to work towards liberation from samsara, a happy future rebirth. Liberation from samsara and enlightenment doesn't last long, because inevitably our lives will end in death, and the time. So death is certain to happen to all of us, and the time that we'll die, when we'll die, is totally uncertain. And in the intervening time, from now until our death occurs, there's very little time to practice Dharma. Right? So it's important, if we see some benefit in trying to practice the Buddha's teachings, to try to put them into practice as much as we can immediately, right now, each day, and each hour. So then after death, then most of us will take rebirth. Probably all of us will take rebirth. So if we take rebirth, there's only two directions to go: either rebirth in the lower realms as an animal, hungry ghost, or hell being, or rebirth in the upper realms. So then it can be helpful to recall that, if we take rebirth through the force of anger and the strong afflictive emotions, then we're likely to take rebirth as an animal or hell being or hungry ghost, in which case we'd experience, much greater physical and mental suffering than we experience now, and especially we'd have no opportunity to practice Dharma in that life. And in such existence, it's extremely difficult to practice virtue and to create the causes to take rebirth as a human being or in an upper realm again. So therefore, it's important to use this opportunity that we have with human body and human intelligence to not create harm for others, but to bring about as much benefit as we can for ourselves and others. So then a basic way to do that is to understand, well, what are the causes of happiness for ourselves and happiness for others? What are the causes of suffering for ourselves and others? So then the Buddha taught that it's karma. It's basically our own actions, and especially our intention. So when we create actions with the intention to harm, then it definitely creates non-virtuous karma, which results in our own suffering in this life and also future lives. Whereas when we create actions motivated by the intention to help and benefit ourselves and others, then we create virtuous karma, which leads to happy rebirth and also happy experiences in this life and future lives. So recognizing that this is just a natural law, it's not something that happens because the Buddha said it would, but it's just as plants grow, specific kinds of varieties of plants grow from specific seeds, or just as gravity attracts objects, gravity pulls objects down, then also through the force of positive and negative intention, then we create actions which bring about suffering or happy results. So then recognizing the law of karma, then try to generate a strong determination to use your life, and especially the next couple hours, to create causes for the well-being of oneself and others. But then seeing that just happiness in this life is something that will definitely end when this life ends. And also happiness of future lives, although it's definitely something to strive for, but as long as we don't eliminate the causes for samsara, then again we'll take rebirth and experience old age, sickness, and death repeatedly without end. So therefore, while we have the opportunity and while we've met the Buddha's teachings, it's important to try to understand, so this is especially what we'll work on tonight, to try to understand what are the causes for taking rebirth in a life whereby we inevitably experience problems, hardship, pain, dissatisfaction. And is it possible to eliminate or to be completely free from being reborn into that kind of existence again and again and again? So because the root cause of samsara is a mistaken perception or ignorance, a kind of distorted way of perceiving things, then it's possible to eliminate that with wisdom, which sees things the way they are, which sees reality as it is. So then recognizing that anger, attachment, greed, jealousy, and all the other problems, physical and mental problems we have, all arise from this fundamental, distorted way of perceiving things. Then we can generate the aspiration to develop the wisdom which completely eradicates this ignorance, which is the root of samsara, and thereby achieve lasting peace and happiness, which comes about by totally eliminating all afflictive emotions and their most fundamental cause. But then even if we achieve perfect peace for ourselves alone, still all of our brothers and sisters, our mother and father, our friends and family, who've been so kind, who've been inexpressibly kind to us from life to life, will still be trapped in samsara and trapped in suffering. So it would be totally selfish not to try to do whatever we can to try to relieve the suffering of our of other sentient beings who've been kind to us, and independence upon whom every pleasant experience we have comes into being. So all of our happiness, both worldly happiness in this life and the joy of whatever spiritual realizations we develop up to full enlightenment, all come about in dependence upon the kindness of other sentient beings. So therefore, remembering that, then it's excellent if we can generate the attitude to use our life in whatever way we can to bring about the welfare of all sentient beings, and not just the happiness of this life or the happiness of future rebirths, but to free sentient beings from the suffering of samsara and lead them to the perfect state of enlightenment. So of course, in order to do that, we ourselves have to generate those realizations up to full enlightenment. So then, finally, if we can, then try to generate the attitude of bodhicitta, thinking that I myself must, as quickly as possible, become fully enlightened in order to free all sentient beings from every form of suffering and lead them to the perfect happiness of full enlightenment. So take a minute or two and try to think in whatever way you can, generate a positive motivation. So then if you have faith in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, then again try to regenerate your visualization, or visualize the Buddha Dharma Sangha in the space in front of you, and remember or generate a sense of faith in their ability to guide you in such a way that you can be protected from sufferings of lower realms and suffering of samsara, and lead you to the path of full enlightenment. And then we'll recite this verse of refuge and bodhicitta. It's on page 98 in the prayer book for anyone who would like to read along. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create for teaching the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create for teaching the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay. So that's the preliminary prayers. So welcome to all of you came in during those. So let's see. Where should we start? So this is the first session of, 3 sessions on the 12 links of dependent arising. Can I have the illustration? Is it? Yeah.
Just copies for the back.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you'll need an illustration. Not right away, but soon enough. Actually, could I have another copy also? Because there's stuff written on the back that I want to look at while I look at the picture too. Great.
Just trying to save paper.
Yeah, good job. Yeah, well done. No, I have enough. Yeah, so we won't be looking at this right away, but I hope to get to it during this session. So yeah, okay. So the 12 links of dependent arising. Yeah, is one way to think about dependent arising. I don't know. I feel like maybe I should say kind of how I got here first before I start teaching. So I met Jeff Nye, who's sitting here with the long white beard. We met about 1.5 years ago in Solokhumbu, in Nepal, eastern Nepal, in the mountains. So he was there doing retreat, and I came there to do retreat. But then our mutual teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's the spiritual director of PMT, he happened to be there at the same time. So then. Yeah, we spent about a month there together, so then we got to talking, and we realized, well, I'm from Williamsburg, Virginia, actually, and Jeff's, has been living in Northern Virginia for a long time. So then he said that next time I come to visit Virginia, because usually I stay in India, then to maybe the center might like it if I came. So then when I was planning this trip, then I got in touch with the SPC, Losang, and then Losang invited me to come to the center, Dundru. Invited me to come to the center. So yeah, so that's how I'm here. So I came to India because, to see my family and friends. I mean, I came from India to the U.S. to see my family primarily. I've been in India the last 5 years. Actually, I've been in India since 2001. But it's been 5 years since I came back to the U.S. So my 5-year student visa expired. So I've come back to apply for a new visa and also see my family. So so I've been in the U.S. about almost 3 weeks now. So yeah, this weekend then decided to come and spend the time with you all at the center. So thank you for on this rainy evening coming out of your homes, making your way here to learn something about the 12 links of dependent arising and Buddhist teachings. So yeah, let me introduce, before we actually look at the diagram and start discussing the different parts of the diagram, or the illustration, you should say. Let me just give a little introduction to the dependent arising in general and 12 links of dependent arising. So usually when His Holiness the Dalai Lama explains the Buddhism, he says basically you can subsume all of Buddhist teachings into two aspects. One is the view of interdependence. So the view means, I guess I should probably back up a little bit. I mean, basically all of us, whether we're whatever country we're from, whatever nationality we are, whatever kind of civilization we're part of, or whatever religion we practice, we're all the same in being human beings. And all human beings are the same as all animals and all other creatures in wanting happiness, basically wanting well-being, wanting to have safety and peace and be well-fed and have have a satisfaction in the mind, have peace in the mind, and a sense of joy in the mind, and health in the body. Right? So, in short, all sentient beings are the same in wanting happiness and not wanting the opposite, not wanting suffering, not wanting unhappiness, not wanting misery, not wanting conflict, not wanting hunger or thirst, and the physical. So, since ancient times until now, then we engage, every action that we engage in, you can interpret as being for the purpose of achieving some happiness or for the purpose of avoiding and reducing some form of suffering. So, and in the world, whether a person is religious or non-religious, then this can be a basis for ethics, a basis for treating other people in a way that does not cause them harm and in a way that benefits them. So, I mean, one kind of way to summarize a secular ethics would be, if you can't help others, at least don't harm them, or don't harm others and help as much as you can. But then, of course, all the religious traditions arose as a way to deal with the kind of questions that humans ask and the kind of problems that we face that can't be answered just by observing the physical world. So then, among the religions, you could divide religions into those which assert the existence of a creator, God. So like Christianity and Islam and Judaism, the Abrahamic religions, and also the mainstream Hinduism. Also, they assert the existence of a creator God. So then when we ask some of the difficult questions like, well, why is it that good people experience such like bad luck, or have just a lot of problems, or have a really difficult circumstances or misfortune befalls people who are just basically good, and why is it that some people who seem to lead their lives in a very immoral and destructive way seem to have such good luck and such fortune, as an example, or why is it that why is it that all the different tragedies that befall us, death to our children or young people, or a very debilitating sickness. Why is it that those things happen? So when we ask those questions, why, oftentimes there's not an obvious physical explanation, right? So we turn to some kind of metaphysical explanation. So all the religions seek to try to answer those questions and also give us guidance for how to lead a wholesome life, how to lead a moral life. So then in the religions, there's those which assert the existence of a creator God, and those which don't, right? So those which don't are basically Buddhism and Jainism. So Jainism is an Indian religion, ancient Indian religion, which arose about the same time as Buddhism. So those two religions, how do they explain things happening is more in a naturalistic way. That every phenomena, so most phenomena in the world, every phenomena which is impermanent, arises from its own uncommon causes and conditions, right? So for example, if you want to build a building like this, then first you need to have concrete. To make concrete, you have to have sand, and concrete mix and water, mix it together, and then pour a foundation. And on top of that, you have to have construction workers who know how to set up a frame, the walls, and plaster, and everything. Or in the plant world, which is more sort of a traditional example, is like if you want to grow a field full of corn, you have to plant corn seeds. You can't plant rice seeds or or sorghum or soybeans or something like that. Like it's only from the particular cause of soil and moisture and warmth and corn seeds from which corn plants rise. So like that, everything in the world, everything that arises in the world and passes away has specific causes and conditions which give rise to it. So it's the same with our internal world, with our internal experience of the world, of pleasant feelings and unpleasant feelings, and a sense of happiness, sense of peace, sense of contentment, and sense of connectedness with others, versus our sense of loneliness, sense of anger, irritation, jealousy, and fear. Each of those, all those mental experiences also arise from specific causes and conditions which give rise to them. Right? So although in Buddhism you see a lot of iconography, like statues and images and people, making offerings and prostrations and prayers to, it appears that they're praying to those inanimate objects, but actually it's not the case. All the images representing images and illustrations of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and different teachers are all just symbols representing the path, basically, that they followed. First, those people as teachers who can guide us, not as all-powerful beings who can save us from suffering, like miraculously somehow. Actually, the Buddha taught in the sutra that the Buddhas don't lift sentient beings out of suffering like helping someone get up out of the mud. They don't. What's the second? They don't transfer their realizations into the minds of sentient beings. They benefit sentient beings by teaching the truth, right? So when we pay homage to, it looks like statues and images representing the Buddha, it's not that we're praying to the Buddha in a way that we're saying, please come save me, as if they're an all-powerful being that has the power to just eliminate and erase all the problems in the life, but rather praying to, in a sense of requesting a very learned teacher to guide us, right, to give us guidance. And by making offerings and making prayers is a way of creating the causes to open our mind to receive the guidance from those beings, and also to receive guidance from ordinary people who have the wisdom that can help us. So in Buddhism then, it's asserted that that there is no all-powerful creator, but rather that happiness and suffering arise from their specific causes and conditions. So that's why a dependent arising is extremely important. Understanding that everything arises in dependence upon causes and conditions, in dependence upon parts, and then at a subtle level, in dependence upon mental imputation, which I'll get to more later. But basically, everything in the world is changing from moment to moment, and in flux, in dependence upon what sort of networks or what sort of meetings of causes and conditions come together at any point, at any place, at any time. So in that way, everything. Well, in that way, it's like, and also, well, what creates the specific causes for our own experience, right? For our personal experience of well-being, or our personal experience of not well-being, it all comes from causes that we ourselves create, right? So our own experience of happiness and suffering comes from our own actions which are not virtuous or non-virtuous. But unfortunately, it's not the case that that just because we engage in only virtuous actions this life, that the results that we experience are only the result of those actions, because we have countless previous lives in which we've done countless virtuous and non-virtuous things, right? Countless positive and negative things, harmful and helpful things in relation to other sentient beings. So in any person's life, all kinds of karmas which have been created from countless past lives are ripening. But it's by understanding the law of cause and effect, karma, the law of cause and effect, that we can use our volition to decide, to refrain from actions like stealing, killing, lying, adultery, and so forth, which are harmful to others, and rather engage in actions such as being honest, protecting protecting and nourishing the life of others, protecting the possessions of others, speaking in a way that's honest, and generating the attitude of caring about and being concerned about and having consideration for the well-being of others. So in that way, we can create causes for our happiness in this life, but also especially our happiness in future lives, and thereby create a basis for generating higher levels of realization and higher levels of wisdom and skill in helping others, so that we can gradually be a greater and greater benefit to other sentient beings, and be like role models that we see who've been extremely powerfully beneficial to people in the world, like Jesus, or like Saint Francis, or like His Holiness the Dalai Lama now, or like the Buddha in the past, or like Gandhi or Martin Luther King. There's so many, when you look around the world to see people who've used their life in one life, been able to really benefit many, many, many people in a very profound way, then that comes about through generating merit and engaging in virtue and generating wisdom, and cultivating the aspiration to be beneficial to others, not only in one life, but from life to life. Okay, so you can, but I was starting out by saying that you can subsume all of Buddha's teachings into two aspects: the wisdom, realizing interdependence, right? Realizing the wisdom, realizing that basically all the things I've just said, that everything arises in dependence upon cause and conditions and different variables and factors. So we can, if we understand that, then we can be more skillful in creating our own future, in short. And then the other aspect of Buddha's teachings is the behavior of compassion. So recognizing fundamentally that all sentient beings, no sentient being wants to experience harm, just like us. So basically, it's like the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So just as none of us would want someone to harm us, and none of us wants to be deceived, wants to be lied to, wants to be stolen from, wants to be betrayed, wants to have our trust broken, betrayed. So recognizing all the things that all the kind of actions that people might engage in to harm us, and how we don't like that, then recognizing that, then we should refrain from doing any of those things to others, right? So so that's the basis for the behavior of compassion. Right? Okay, so that's dependent arising in the kind of the broadest sense. So the wheel of life here, or the 12 links of dependent arising, is also called this diagram. Actually has to do with dependent arising in a slightly more narrow sense. So here, I think I was asking Jeff in the car on the way what kind of teachings have been happening at the center recently. So he was saying that Lauren has been teaching the middle link Lam Rim, and you're up to the section on shamatha. So you should have covered the 12 links already sometime in the past 2 years, I think. So can anyone tell me which of the 3 scopes of the Lam Rim, which scope is the 12 links, the explanation of the 12 links, dependent arising part of? There's a small scope, middle scope, and great scope, right? So there's like A, small scope, B, middle scope, C, great scope. So the 12 links of dependent arising is part of which scope? Anyone know?
Middle, right?
The middle?
Is that middle?
Yeah, exactly, the middle scope. Yeah, it's part of the middle scope. So so the middle scope of the Lam Rim, what defines the middle scope? Like what is the what was I could say? There's beings, just as there's the small scope, middle scope, and great scope. There's a being of the small scope, being of the middle scope, and a being like a person whose their disposition is to train in the practices of the middle scope. So what is and according to their motivation, right? So what's the motivation of a person of the middle scope? I don't know. Yeah, primarily renunciation. Yeah, meaning that they have the wish to be free from samsara, right? So yeah, so the 12 links is taught in the context of, in the Lamrim, it's taught in the context of being taught for a person who has the aspiration to, or is primarily trying to cultivate the aspiration to be free from all the suffering of samsara. So the 12 links is essentially a description of how we take rebirth in samsara. Well, a description of like what samsara is should be our first question actually. And then how we take rebirth in samsara. And then by knowing that process, how to get out of that. How to cease rebirth in samsara by cutting the links of the chain, right? So the 12 links actually are on the outermost rim of the wheel. So this is like, I mean, the main thing is the wheel of life, this kind of wheel. Actually, the wheel of life is a little bit deceptive. Bhava chakra. I don't know Sanskrit, so I'm not sure what bhava means, but in Tibetan it's called sipe korlo. So sipa doesn't really mean life. It means more like, well, it means really more like samsara. So it's more like the wheel of existence. Some other translations are the wheel of existence or the wheel of becoming. So it means like the wheel of like taking rebirth or taking existences or the wheel of arising in samsara again and again and again. That's circle. It's a circular process. Maybe, how many of you, have all of you been to like kind of introduction level teachings here before? How many of you are first time or brand new? Yeah? Okay. You are? Okay.
To hear.
Yeah, to hear. But Buddhism?
No.
Basic Buddhism, you know? Okay. Ali, I'll give opportunity for questions. So if you have basic questions, then yeah, feel free to answer. I mean to ask. I need to answer, right? So feel free to ask. But, okay. So, well, I wanted to say, first of all, because this, I mean, the whole Lam Rim, and also this explanation of the 12 links of dependent arising as it's taught, you know, by the Buddha in sutras. So there's a sutra called the Sutra of Dependent Arising, and then there's also a sutra called, which explains these 12 links in detail. And there's another sutra called the Rice Seedling Sutra, where the Buddha also taught the 12 links of dependent arising. So this is something that's taught both in the Pali Canon and also in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, or in the Sanskrit Canon. But when the Buddha taught this, I mean, the Buddha was teaching 2,600 years ago in a context where, you know, he's teaching in a society where everybody just takes for granted that past and future lives exist, right? So in that way, it's very different from our society and our worldview now. So I thought to say maybe a few words about just about past and future lives and the existence of past and future lives before jumping into an explanation of what is samsara and how do we take rebirth and how can we be free from samsara. Yeah, if that would be helpful to people. So, yeah, this is something I think a lot about as a person who's from the United States, from a Western background, and with a modern education, which is largely influenced by scientific and especially scientific materialistic outlook. Not materialistic in the sense of like wanting a lot of stuff, wanting a lot of things, but materialist in the way of thinking of the world as being something that is reducible to material matter, that is reducible to matter, in short, right? So in scientific, in mainstream science and yeah, to some degree in mainstream society, there is this kind of, under the surface, there's this kind of view that the most fundamental building blocks of everything in the world are like molecules or atoms or more subtle, subtle particles like the Higgs boson and all these other kind of eccentric particles. So of course, people who practice religion for the most part don't have that view, or people who seriously practice religion, I guess you should say, don't have that view. Yeah, many people do, and I know. I guess it's it's important because I know for many people who want to engage in the practice of, well, to engage in the practice of meditation, you don't need to believe in past and future lives. It's not necessary at all to practice basic mindfulness or loving kindness meditation. But to really, well, to fully practice what the Buddha taught, or to practice like generating renunciation, for instance, or generating really deep sense of refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, or generating, a sincere sense of like bodhicitta, all these kind of, these different levels of Buddhist realizations. It's really difficult to do without believing in past and future lives. It becomes the whole project becomes something totally different. So, of course, it's up to each of us as an individual to decide whether we believe in past and future lives or not. And it's not like if we don't, then we can't learn a lot from the Buddhist teachings. But many people have. So I think as a Westerner, like I remember when I first was thinking about, when I was in my 20s, early 20s, and was thinking about whether I really believe in karma or not, because the whole law of karma, law of cause and effect, it's explained as something that plays out over lives, over multiple lives. It's not something that happens just within one life, for the most part. So when I was in my early 20s and thinking about law of karma and past and future lives, and yeah, it's something that at first I just kind of put on well, just be skeptical. We should all be skeptical about, and well, try to be objective about, and not assume that it doesn't exist, and not assume that it does exist, but just look at the different reasons for both. Look at the reasons why it might and why it might not. But many people have the misconception that if we accept a scientific outlook on the world, that means we can't accept the existence of past and future lives, right? But that, I think, is totally mistaken, because actually within modern science, it's not like science has one view on things. Science is made up of different communities, of different communities of scientists, like biology and physics and chemistry, and psychology and so forth. So different fields have different perspectives, and individuals, of course. Scientists are made up of scientists and researchers. So different individuals have different perspectives. But one thing I just want to put out there that might be helpful is that there's actually a lot of scientific research by scientists who are not in the mainstream, which doesn't necessarily mean they're quacks, right? So if you look at the research of some scientists, there's a lot of anomalous phenomena that are very difficult and actually impossible to explain with just a materialistic theory, a theory that everything is reducible to matter. So for example, one of the most renowned, there's a couple different fields of research that are helpful if you're thinking about whether past and future lives exist. There are a couple different fields of research that are really interesting and provocative to look at. So one is, there's a whole big body of research by Ian Stevenson, is a psychologist from the University of Virginia, who passed away in about 2003. But he spent most of his career, more than 20 years, researching this phenomena of very young children who are 3 or 4 years old, then proclaiming to their parents that they're, the way they express this in different ways, but proclaiming that they have memories and knowledge of things that happened before they were born, and sometimes even saying I'm not your child. I'm actually such and such a person, identifying with someone with a different name, with a spouse, or I live in a different place, and remembering in detail events that happened before they were born, right? And then, so Ian Stevenson's main protege now is, or one who's taken up the reins of his research, is named Jim Tucker. So he holds the same chair at University of Virginia, Jim Tucker. And there's two kind of mainstream books he's published recently. One, I'm not sure I can pull up the names. I think Life After Life is one. He has another one. I'm not sure. But they're very easy to read. And in those he presents basically his research. So he's doing similar research, but he focuses more on the cases of children in the United States. Ian Stevenson focused more on children in other countries like Lebanon, Turkey, India, Sri Lanka, and so forth. But that's very provocative kind of stuff to read. Because how is it that, these very young children, and in a typical case, Stevenson would find a child who, by hearing about it through the grapevine, find a child who, at a young age, started talking about, things that happened before they were born, and other people who, and then so the project is to check, well, is there any way those children could know about those things, just within this life? Like, could they have heard from their parents, or heard from a relative, or heard about those things from a neighbor, or heard about it on the news, or seen on TV? So if there's information that the children have that they can't possibly have accessed by any of those ways, then you have to explain, well, how can they know about that person and what happened? Oftentimes there's, well, in short, how can you know about this person who existed and died before the child was born, and know the names of that person, or the names of other people they know, or know like hiding places they had in their house, or know where that person lived, and so forth. So that's one case of a big body of strong evidence for the existence of previous lives, right? And then another body of evidence is from, what's commonly called near-death experiences. So this field of research was started by someone named Moody, maybe Brian Moody, I'm not sure. Is it Brian Moody? Yeah, and then taken up in a big way by a Dutch cardiologist named Pim van Lommel. And then currently is being the kind of main person doing this kind of research is named Sam Parnia. I think he's also Dutch, but he's an anesthesiologist at I think Johns Hopkins, or one of the prominent hospitals in the Northeast. So why this the near-death experience is interesting because, there's evidence that people can have vivid experiences while their brain is not functioning, right? So when someone is clinically dead, what typically like a doctor or nurse will shine a light in their eyes to see if the pupils dilate, right? So that's because that's related to the most fundamental aspect, most fundamental part of our brain. I think it's called the cerebral cortex, but just at the base of where the spine meets the brain, it's kind of the most primitive part of the brain. So if that part of the brain is not functioning, then the rest of the brain also is not functioning. So like when someone has a cardiac arrest, then the heart stops beating, then they stop pumping blood to the brain, and within a few minutes, all the neural messaging in the brain completely ceases, right, due to lack of oxygen. So then someone's rushed to a hospital, and then from like the 1950s and 60s, when the science of resuscitation became became more advanced than it was before. Especially there's these kind of shock pads put on people's chests so they can start their heart again. Before that, I didn't realize. Before that, you couldn't restart someone's heart again, or it was almost very rare, almost impossible. But with advances in resuscitation and cardiology, and then Sam Parnia says with advances in anesthesiology, now a person can be clinically dead, which means their heart's not beating and there's no brain function, and then be resuscitated for even an hour or 2 hours later. So what Pim van Lommel, Brian Moody and Pim van Lommel also found was that many people who've had that experience of dying and then coming back to life, being resuscitated, they in between that time they have very vivid experiences. So some of the typical experiences are seeing a light and having a sense of moving through a tunnel towards a light, and then feeling a presence of all-pervading love. And some people also, meet and talk with deceased relatives. So you could think, well, all of those things could just be kind of hallucinations that they have just when they die or just when they're being resuscitated. Doesn't mean actually that they perceived or were actually conscious when their brain's not functioning. But some of the really interesting evidence is when people have what's called third-person veridical experiences. So it means that while their brain's not functioning, they actually they can see things happening in the environment around them that a third person can verify actually happened at that time, right? So for many of the people, well, when they're resuscitated, obviously they're in an operating table. So there's many cases where people actually, because many people who die, they have the experience of floating above their body and then seeing their own body from above and being able to see and hear what's happening around them. So in some cases there are people who've been able to overhear conversations between like the doctor and the nurse in the operating table while the ears are plugged and the eyes are shut, eyes are taped shut, and they're known to be dead. Other cases, people have seen like a nurse taking out, like one guy saw a nurse take out his dentures and put them in a drawer, and then days later asked the nurse, where are my dentures? But the nurse knows that he's dead, like when she was doing that, because she was taking out his dentures to be able to put in an oxygen tube. And then, so this Sam Parnia did a recent study where he, which I haven't seen the results of yet, but and I'm not sure if he's even published them yet, but they were, yeah, it sounds kind of gimmicky in a way, but they were putting symbols in an operating table. There's a big light. In an operating theater, there's a big light over the operating table. So they're putting symbols on top of the light. So if a person were to, have a perspective on the room from the top of the room, then they should be able to remember or identify that symbol. So if they coordinate that a person is known to be clinically dead, and they were able to perceive that at that time, because they would never see that symbol from the time they come to the operating table till the time they leave. They would never physically see it. So if they could see that symbol, then it would be very strong evidence for the main point is here that evidence for people being able to have conscious experience independent of a physical body, right? Because if past and future lives exist, that's the main thing that has to be possible. And that's the main reason then a materialist would say it's impossible to have past and future lives, because every conscious experience depends upon having a brain and or a nervous system and a physical body, right? So if it's possible that there are conscious experiences independent of a physical body, then it means also past and future lives are possible. It means past and future lives are possible. Then some other interesting bodies of research and evidence are clairvoyance and psi. I guess you could, broadly speaking, psi phenomena, but cases of people being able to know things, know what's happening or hear what's happening at a far distant place or in the past or in the future. And also mediums, people being able to channel sort of spirits, people deceased or some other kind of spirits, and then be able to accurately predict phenomena that might happen in the future, or know about information that they couldn't have access to any ordinary way. So, of course, the problem with this sort of research is the whole field of psi phenomena and mediumship is fraught with frauds, right? People who just fake it. Like, I heard there was a famous British one some years ago who had a TV show, and he was found out to be, he was planting like assistants in the line of people waiting to be interviewed, and then they were finding out information and then telling him, and then he was pretending like through clairvoyance he could know what they're thinking. But it seems like there seem to be some that are authentic. Actually, William James, the famous father of American psychology, I just read a good book about his life and his involvement in this kind of research on mediums. So he was involved. He was very much interested in this kind of research. So maybe that's enough said about that. But The main Buddhist, I mean, in Buddhism, the main reason it's asserted that past and future lives exist is because it's asserted that basically conscious experience is something fundamentally different from matter, right? And just material things, atoms and cells, and bone, flesh and blood, and so forth, that because their nature is material, that it's impossible for them to produce something that's fundamentally different as consciousness, as thoughts and feelings and emotions and memories. So, yeah, I mean, there's another interesting article by this philosopher from Duke, Robert Nash, maybe? I think his name is Nash. Anyway, his argument, he argues for the existence of consciousness, which is not reducible to the brain. Well, he argues basically for the existence of consciousness, which is not the activity of the brain. Like a materialist would want to say that, well, what is the mind? The mind is what the brain does, right? The mind is just the function of the brain. There is nothing, and this is like Daniel Dennett, is a philosopher at Tufts, that the mind, there is nothing, mind is just like a folk term which describes like what the brain does. But there is nothing really, it's just an illusion, that there is nothing, something as like mind or awareness or consciousness, which is not matter or the function of matter. Whereas Buddhists assert basically the opposite, that no, consciousness is a kind of unique kind of phenomena that exists. And it's not possible for it to be produced by matter. So therefore, if you look at the time of conception, when, if someone's born as a human being, when the egg and the sperm of the parents come together, that just those physical cells, the question is, do just those physical cells produce consciousness somehow? Or those physical cells, when they start to reproduce, and when there's enough of them to sustain like nerve cells and a nervous system, how does consciousness arise from those nerve cells, right? So again, according to Buddhism, actually for conception to happen, it can be that an egg and sperm cell come together, but the force which actually like I guess propels their reproduction, or their multiplying, the cells multiplying, is that a consciousness and a subtle energy with the consciousness, which goes together with that, actually enter into those cells, and then the person starts growing from there. So it's another interesting question, like the Dalai Lama recently asked, in the last few years, asked some scientists at a conference, was, is it possible, does it happen that, a perfectly, viable sperm and a perfectly viable egg cell come together, and they don't produce an embryo, and if that's the case, then what is it? How do you explain that they don't produce an embryo, right? So a Buddhist explanation would be that the presence or absence of consciousness. But if you have a materialistic, if you want to stick with just a purely material explanation, then what would be the factor that would explain that either, a perfectly healthy and with no, no obstructing, no physically preventative conditions, when a perfectly healthy sperm and egg come together, what is it that determines that they either do reproduce and become an embryo or don't? Yeah. Then there's one other kind of argument for consciousness. I mean, one way is think is consciousness independent of the brain, but another way to think is, because a materialist view would be consciousness, what we speak of consciousness is just an outcome of the activity of the brain. But then another kind of anti-materialist argument is that, well, but it seems like it's the case that we engage in mental activities and mental activity, and you could say there's a downward causation, that our mental activity causes changes in the brain. It's not just that changes in the brain cause us to have the experience of consciousness, but that our willful conscious activity causes changes in the brain, right? So there's a whole field of, a growing field of research on neuroplasticity, which is largely related to this. And there's one very provocative researcher and author named Jeffrey Schwartz at UCLA, who spent his career trying to treat people with, treating people with obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, by using meditation, right? Because he had a personal interest in mindfulness meditation. But he has very successful rates of treating people with obsessive compulsive disorder by, he has like a 4-step program, which I won't describe. But in short, his technique, because he also does brain scans on the patients to see what's going on in their brain. So in short, he argues in this book that basically you can see that people with obsessive compulsive disorder, there's like a miswiring in the brain, so that they habitually want to wash their hands or check if the door is locked. And they feel like, even though rationally they know that the door is locked, or they know their hands are clean, they know they've done those things, but there's like a compulsive urge to, and a sense of need to do those things again and again and again, which can be, with brain scans, you can see what's going on, what is abnormal in the neural pathways that causes them to have those thoughts, the thought or the feeling of need to do that. He has an interesting story, but basically he, instead of using drugs or behavioral therapy, he uses basically mindfulness meditation to train people to recognize, first of all, to recognize the compulsive urges when they arise, and to recognize that it's a kind of sickness. And he teaches them that it arises, those thoughts arises, and the feeling of need, the urge arises due to a kind of miswiring in the brain. But then he teaches them what we commonly learn in meditation, to cultivate this sort of objective stance, to recognize that just because thoughts and urges arise in my mind, it doesn't mean that I have to follow them. I can just sit and be a neutral or objective observer and just watch what's going on in my mind without like immediately reacting to it, and thereby being a slave of it. So he teaches people to just recognize those thoughts as a kind of symptom of an illness, then to objectively just mindfully watch when they arise, and recognize that they don't have to follow them. And then, because it's difficult just to sit and watch like a real feeling of like needing to do something arise and just not follow it for a long time. So then he teaches them to willfully redirect their attention to do something constructive. Like, so when the urge to lock the door again or wash the hands again is arising really strongly, to instead just go like take a walk, or do some gardening, or do some crocheting, or do something that's a constructive activity, and then by treating people in this way, then he found for a large percent, much more than treatment with behavioral therapy or with drugs, then over 3 months or 6 months, their urges become less and less and less, and become less powerful. And then he found, he found at the end of 6 months or a year, when he does brain scans again, he can see that the wiring of the brain has changed, right? The pattern of activity in the brain has changed. So he's making an argument that these people, we didn't do anything to change their brain. It's just they changed the way they focus their attention. That's his big thing, focused attention. By instead of focusing their attention on the compulsive urges and following those, by generating an objective stance and then focusing their attention instead on a more constructive activity that is willful, then it changes the physical structure of the brain. So based on that, he's arguing that there is a force, which is the force of intention, or the force of consciousness, or the force of willful awareness, you could say, which is something that is not reducible to just the physical stuff of the brain. So that's another kind of interesting line of argument. I'm trying to think of the name of his book. I think it's something like Your Mind is Not Your Brain, something like that. Anyway, Jeffrey Schwartz is his name, if you're interested. He's at UCLA. and does research on obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay, so so looking at the 12 links of dependent arising, maybe. So oftentimes in the Lamrim, it's the case here, the benefits of studying something are only explained right at the end, after it's all been explained. But I think it's helpful sometimes to just know the benefits right at the beginning to generate some enthusiasm. So this is the basis for my explanation. The Great Treatise of the Stages of the Path by Legtsok Kappa. So yeah. He says at the end he gives, well, how did this illustration arise? So this is an illustration that actually was how do you say? It was commissioned by the Buddha, by Shakyamuni Buddha himself. He asked that this illustration be made and describe how it should be drawn. So it says here that while the Buddha was alive, then who were his two foremost disciples were Shariputra, who was considered foremost in wisdom, and Moggallana, who was considered foremost in psychic powers. So these two disciples who were arhats, that they would, through the force of their realization, that they would travel through the 5 realms of existence, which means the hell realms, hungry ghost realms, animal, the 3 lower realms, and then the desire realm and the form and formless realms. Isn't that right? You know, 3. The 5 then would be the desire. Well, the human realm. So hell being, hungry ghost, animal, humans, and then the God realms. You could subsume those into 5 that way. So they would travel through the 5 realms and then come back and explain to people like what they'd seen and why, through the force of what kind of karmas people created, such that they took rebirth in these different forms of existence, and thereby they would instill the sense of the importance of leading a moral life. In short, the importance of being ethical in their listeners. And it said that some people who had, they had acquaintances or family members or neighbors who didn't really care about morality and didn't have much respect for practicing leading a moral life, that sometimes they would bring them to meet Shariputra and Moggallana and hear about their experiences traveling through the 6 realms, and hear about the different kind of karmas that people create, such that they are born as animals or born in hell or whatever. And then by hearing about that, they would come to have faith in the truth of the law of cause and effect, and come to have an idea about what samsara is, and thereby have a sense of the importance of practicing morality and also practicing meditation and generating the wisdom, which eliminates the root of samsara. So then some of the monks or nuns went to the Buddha and told him about this, and then the Buddha said, "Oh, you should then, because in the future there won't be such excellent teachers as Shariputra and Moggallana, then therefore you should make a painting showing the 5 realms and the 12 links of dependent arising surrounding it at the gatehouse of the monastery." So from the Buddha's time until now, there's a tradition of having this illustration at the front of any monastery. So like now, if you go to India or Tibet or China, you'll see just outside the entrance to the monastery, like there'll be a big temple in the main doorway, but outside the doorway in the veranda, there'll almost always be this illustration will be there, so that anybody who comes has an opportunity to look and learn about what samsara is, and how we're trapped in it and how to escape it. Let me just. Okay, so here Legtsok Kappa points out some of the benefits. He says, understanding this means understanding the wheel of life. Understanding this and becoming familiar with it destroys the unbearable gloom of confusion the root of all problems. It eradicates all mistaken views, holding external and internal compositional activities to arise causelessly or from incompatible causes. So understanding the wheel of life eradicates views holding that all phenomena, our mind, our body, the external environment, holding them to arise from incompatible causes, from causes that actually don't produce them, or from no causes whatsoever. It increases the precious wealth of the treasury of the conqueror's teachings, and is what motivates you towards the path to liberating through exact knowledge of the characteristics of cyclic existence and intense disenchantment with them. Right? So by learning about this, it should instill us with an intense longing to be free from samsara, but understanding what it is. Yeah, so maybe I've already said a lot. So maybe, are there any questions so far? Although I haven't actually started explaining much of what we're actually going to learn about. But, are there any questions so far I could try to answer?
The 5 realms as depicted are 2 God realms?
Yeah, okay.
Animal, hell, and hungry ghost. There's no human realm depicted?
Let's see. No, the human realm is at like between 12 and 2 o'clock. Yeah. I think that's the human realm. The 2 God realms are between 12 and 10 o'clock in the chart. So the God realms is, there's suras, they're called suras and asuras.
Mm.
So there's like more powerful and less powerful gods. So it's said that the less powerful gods are always jealous of the powerful gods, and that they're always warring with each other. So you see at the picture of that realm between 12 and 10 o'clock, they're fighting with each other. So that depicts the 2 God realms, the suras and asuras.
And sometimes that's depicted as 2 realms, right?
Yeah, it can be. So when you talk about the 6 realms, you
Right.
divide that into 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the right hand one is the human realm?
Yeah, so then from 12 down to like, what is that? 2 o'clock is human realm. And then from 2 all the way down to 4 o'clock is the hungry ghost, called the hungry ghost realm. And then from 4 o'clock over to 7:30 or so is the hell realm, right at the bottom. And then the animal realm is on the left. Well, if you don't have any questions, I thought before we get too tired to do so, I'd like to do some meditation. Because I want to do some meditation with you every session. So often I have the habit of just keep talking and then answering questions and then run out of time and energy to do any meditation. Yeah, so before that happens, then if you need to stand up to stretch your legs or just kind of get your blood moving a little bit, feel free to do so. You want to be physically comfortable while you're meditating, right? Okay. So I'm assuming most of you have meditated before. Is that right? Is there anyone who hasn't done any meditation at all? Okay, good. So Well, no, so we'll do some analytical meditation. So first to get comfortable in your meditation posture. And then we'll spend a minute or two just watching the breath in order to focus our attention. And then, I'll ask you to think about some questions. Right? So I'll ask questions, and I'll just ask you to try to, just think about how you would answer those. Try to answer. Discover answers for yourself. Okay, so first, sit comfortably.
I shut my phone off. I am so sorry.
Yeah,
I apologize.
no problem. It always happens. I even do it sometimes.
Oh, flood watch. Let's see, it did some kind of override or something. I'm sorry.
Okay. So everyone, phones in airplane mode.
Sorry.
So as you get comfortable in your posture, gradually bring your attention to your breath or another object, and simply try to focus on that object. Okay, so the first couple questions I'll ask you to think about is, so thinking about our birth into this life. So we've all been born in this life, or come into this life. So the first question is, well, how did we first, well, I guess you could say in this life, when did we first come to exist? Did we begin, and when did our first conscious experience happen, you could think? When did we have our first conscious experience of this life? And where did that come from? How did that arise? So think about these two questions. When did we have our first conscious experience of feeling or thinking? Having experience, the most basic experience of anything whatsoever in this life, and how is that produced? What causes preceded and gave rise to that first moment of experience in this life? So spend about 5 minutes or so thinking about that question. then another set of questions is has to do with the end of our life. So we're thinking about the beginning of this life, but then if we think about the very end of this life, when we die, then what will happen with your stream of consciousness, right? Yeah, does it just cease to exist, or does it continue to exist in some form? Why or why not? And then if it continues to exist, what is it that you might do in this life that will affect what kind of existence you have in the future after this life? Right? So begin with just thinking about, at the end of this life, when this life comes to an end, what happens with this stream of consciousness which we experience now? Does it continue on after the body ceases to function, or not? And why or why not? And if it does continue on, then what affects how it what affects what affects what kind of experience we have after this life, and especially what are the things that we do in this life? What kind of mental habits we create, or thoughts, or actions that we engage in, and how would they have any bearing on what happens with our stream of consciousness, and what kind of experience we have, or what kind of rebirth we take in the future. So take about another 5 minutes, think about that set of questions. So we'll start with meditation there. So I'd like to just explain, before we stop, the definition of samsara. So, especially those of you who have been studying Buddhism a little bit for some time. Yeah, it's easy. Oftentimes, I know myself, for a long time, had a total misunderstanding of what samsara is. Yeah, would anybody like to have a go at giving a description or some kind of, what's the main characteristic or a definition of samsara? Well, maybe I'll make it simpler. Do you think samsara is something outside of us or something inside of us?
Inside.
Yeah, that's very good, yeah. That's right. That's the most important thing. It's not, samsara is not something outside. Because sometimes we talk about like cycling in samsara, taking rebirth in samsara. So sometimes it sounds like, and we oftentimes use the analogy, samsara is like a prison. So oftentimes it sounds like samsara is like an external environment that we come into and go out of. But actually it's not like that. Samsara is something, it's within us in the sense that actually it is part of us. It's kind of like a major characteristic of our existence. So the definition of samsara is the continuum of rebirths again and again of the contaminated aggregates. Zache kumpo, yanda yanda kiwi, gyun. Yeah. The continuity or the continuum again and again of the rebirth of the contaminated aggregates. Right? So there's 3 or 4 parts there. I'll try to explain each part and make it kind of one whole gel as one whole thing in your mind. Well, the first thing is it's a continuum, right? It's like a continuum. Like we have a continuum of consciousness. From the time we walked in the door and came in and sat down till now, we have a continuity of experience. So it's something that exists through time in an unbroken flow, right? So it's a continuum of what? Of taking rebirth again and again. So this means that we take rebirth. Like now we're human beings. Then as human beings from the time of conception, then we grow older and older, and then eventually, the body becomes aged, crippled, unable to support physical function anymore. So then the body ceases, and the stream of consciousness separates from the body, which is death, which is what death is. And then the stream of consciousness, to the force of karma and afflictive emotions, then again takes rebirth. Means again conjoins with the body. If we take rebirth as a human, then in the womb of our future, a mother of our future life, and then again we take rebirth. So repeatedly, we take rebirth like that. Take rebirth, grow old, die, again and again and again. So there's in an unbroken continuum. So it's a continuum of taking rebirth repeatedly, again and again, of the contaminated aggregates, right? So this is kind of the real important part, is the contaminated aggregates. So what do we mean by contaminated? This term comes up again and again in Buddhist teachings. Zakche in Tibetan. So zakpa, actually in Tibetan, zakpa, or like you could say contaminant, is another word for afflictive emotions, or destructive emotions, or disturbing emotions, right? So when we talk about contaminated by what, right? Something like, if you talk about contaminated water, it's not that the water itself is something, well, it's not like there's something wrong with the H2O itself, it's that there's something else that you don't want in there that's polluting it, that's contaminating it, right? So similarly, it's not like there's something wrong, fundamentally wrong with our consciousness, right? Consciousness is like pure. Its nature is to be pure, like water or like the sky. But it's that there's something contaminating the stream of consciousness, or contaminating, and we say the aggregates, right? So yeah, maybe it's a little better to talk about the aggregates before we talk about the contaminant. We're talking about contaminated aggregates, but maybe it's better to talk about the basis. What is it that's being contaminated? So when we talk about the aggregates, there's the 5 aggregates. Now, what are the 5 aggregates? You know? Somebody must know. The 5 aggregates. There's the form aggregate, which is our body. Right? So the 5 aggregates describe, as a person, what are we made up of? Like, what are the main parts of us as a person? So we have a body. So the body, the form aggregate, or the physical aggregate, includes all of our physical aspects. You know, our flesh, our blood, our bones. Yeah, even our voice, you could think. Even all of our cells, and even the subtle, you can say, well, the subtle parts of our organs, like our ear organ, our eye organ, our tongue organ, which enable us to experience the physical world around us, right? So basically all the parts of our body are the form aggregate, and then there's 5 aggregates, right? So the first is the form aggregate, and the remaining 4 are all non-physical, right? And of those, 3 are expressly mental, and 1 includes things that are not mental, right? So the first is the form aggregate. The second is the feeling aggregate. So that means all of our mental experience of feeling, and there's 3 kinds of feeling, basically. Happy feeling, suffering feeling, or pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and neutral feelings, right? So, and then there's feelings related with all of our 5 sense consciousness. So when we see something, we might feel good, you know, and that goes along with as a result of seeing that. When we hear something, there might be a good feeling that goes, like when we hear a pleasant sound, there's a pleasant feeling that arises in conjunction with that sound, that awareness of sound. Similarly with smells, taste, and tactile sensations. And then there's also mental feelings. So when we remember something or think of something about the future, or just have some kind of a thought, and then there's a feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that goes with that, then those are mental feelings, right? So there's form aggregate, and then the feeling aggregate, and then discrimination is basically thoughts, like this is a watch, this is a table, I am me, you are you. Those are all those kind of discriminations of this is this, that is that. Those kind of thoughts are the third aggregate. Then the fourth is kind of a miscellaneous category. It's called compositional factors. So it includes all the other secondary mental, what do you say? Well, there's a main mind, secondary minds, I guess, and secondary mental experiences. So we have feelings and discriminations, but then there's all other kinds of mental experiences that we have, like intention, or remembering things, or being mindful of something. So all those kind of mental experience, along with the imprints of, like when we create karmic imprints, those are also all included in this fourth category called compositional factors. It's the fourth aggregate. And then the last is the consciousness. It's called the consciousness aggregate, Nambashipa. So that mainly, actually, it mainly is referring to the mental consciousness, which is what moves from life to life in a non-dormant way, in a manifest way. So mainly refers to our mental consciousness. So, so that's the continuity of thoughts, feelings, of perceptions that are not expressly tied to any sense perception or any perception of a physical thing outside us, but is primarily our mental experience. But then it also includes all the other main minds. So I won't describe the secondary mental factors and main minds now, but the fourth. So these are our 5 aggregates, right? So what makes us up as a person? So those are not inherently impure or inherently flawed or mistaken, but yet the 5 aggregates that we experience now in this life, they are contaminated aggregates. So what does that mean, that they're contaminated? It means that they've arisen in part through the force of afflictive emotions. So again, what is it that contaminates the aggregates is afflictive emotions. So afflictive emotions, the easiest to identify is anger, but also includes So anger is on the side of being averse to things and disliking. So in the category of anger also, or related to anger, also come like hatred, belligerence, spite, vengeance. All these things all arise. They're all other kind of mental experiences, mental factors, which arise or are related to or are branches of anger. And they're all on the side of being averse to things, disliking things, seeing something as unpleasant and wanting to push it away or destroy it. And then on the other side of afflictive emotions, there's those that see something as attractive and exaggerate the attractiveness of it and are attracted to and drawn to and want to possess or control it. So that includes like greed, afflictive desire, greed, jealousy, lust, craving, grasping, and so forth. So these are the main kind of, so you can see these afflictive emotions are always either pushing something away or pushing away that which we perceive as unattractive and unpleasant, and or pulling towards, craving that which we perceive as pleasant and attractive. Yeah, and then also, I mean, like depression, low self-esteem, kind of afflictive sadness, afflictive doubt, arrogance, afflicted pride, inflated pride. These are all different forms of afflictive emotions, right? And the most subtle and the root of all the other afflictive emotions, so this is one of the big things we'll talk about tomorrow, is ignorance. So a special kind of ignorance, meaning an ignorance which exaggerates or reifies the reality, the concrete reality of things. So this is ignorance grasping at true existence, grasping at things as existing independent, in and of their own right, or through their own power, without depending upon causes and conditions, without depending upon parts, and especially without depending upon mental imputation. So that kind of ignorance, which is grasping at a self, or grasping at true existence, grasping at inherent existence, those are all kind of synonyms. As we'll discuss more tomorrow, but that's also included in what contaminates. So when we say that samsara is the continuum of the rebirth again and again of contaminated aggregates, then the contaminated aggregates means the aggregates. Basically, you can reduce these 5 aggregates into just the body and mind, which are part of us as a person, right? So it means this body and mind, which is produced by, out of these, or produced by these afflictive emotions of ignorance, anger, and attachment, and the continuity of those aggregates taking rebirth again and again and again. So, I don't know, can you get your head around that? All of that is sort of several different things, but yeah. So, yeah.
So, question.
Yeah, please.
So, the goal of the contaminated aggregate going through samsara time and time again is to purify each aggregate, is it what you're saying? That over millennia and at each rebirth we perfect the self?
No.
Is that what you're saying?
No.
So you keep you keep being reborn with the same contaminated aggregates. Do they ever get cleaned up?
That's the big question. Yeah, that's the $1 million question. But you're kind of interpreting, giving a little different interpretation.
I'm asking.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, I'm trying to I'll clarify. So it's not. We often have the conception that there's like a purpose to each rebirth. It's a common, it's a common conception that's out there. A way of thinking of things that's out there. That every rebirth, and actually, it also has a basis in like Hinduism. In Hindu religion, there is also the same kind of concept, which is popular in our culture as well. That every rebirth we take, we're meant to learn something or meant to do something, and that there's an upward trajectory. That we learn something and then we move on, and we learn something else and we move on, and that we improve from life to life. But the Buddhist picture is not so rosy.
Okay. Just asking.
It's more like the contaminated aggregates have no purpose, really. Actually, it's like contaminated water. It doesn't really have a purpose. It is like that.
It is.
Because certain causes and conditions came together, and you have contaminated water. But it'd be really good to have it purified so that you can use it, right, for something, right? So similarly, it's like our aggregates, as we experience them now, they're contaminated. That's why we get uncomfortable for sitting out for a long time. That's why we get irritated when, people say things, or that's why we have a lot of doubt and all the mental problems we have. It's because this life has been produced in large part by afflictive emotions and ignorance, right? And there's not any specific purpose for it, but because we have taken a human rebirth and we have so much good fortune, like in having good health and having mental clarity and having access to education and having access to spiritual teachings and having human intelligence, then we can use this life for excellent purpose to really improve, to dramatically improve our situation, like in this life, and also the likelihood that we'll have good future rebirths and be free from samsara, and we can even achieve freedom from samsara just in this life itself. It's possible, though very difficult. But it's not that if we don't do anything, just the contaminated aggregates just lead us on an upward trajectory. Not at all. They lead us rather up and down, up and down, up and down. If we don't do anything, make any effort to go upward, then we don't. In short, yeah. Other questions?
So when you renounce samsara, what do you renounce?
Yeah. So when you renounce samsara, you renounce this process of taking rebirth through the force of ignorance and anger and attachment.
And what's that?
What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, basically, it's like, what is that? It means it means that you see that as long as I have ignorance grasping at an exaggerated sense of self, which gives rise to being, averse to some things, angry about some things, and grasping and craving other things, that I'll take, when I die, I'll take rebirth through the force of those afflictive emotions. And as long as I do so, then I'll have sickness, I'll have relationship problems, I'll have, depression, I'll have confusion and dissatisfaction, right? So it means renouncing or generating a wish. I mean, renunciation is really a wish to be free from that whole process, right? By understanding how distorted the exaggerated sense of grasping at a self, which gives rise to anger and attachment, how that leads us into a dissatisfactory state of existence again and again, and wanting to be free from that.
To be free from ignorance, right?
Yeah, wanting to be free from ignorance, in short, and wanting to be free from the samsara that ignorance creates, right? Yeah, it's kind of like we're in a bad dream, and recognizing that it's just something created by our mind, and we need to get out of it.
So it's like a wish, like a wish.
A wish.
A wish.
Yeah, renunciation is a wish.
Yeah.
It's the wish to be free from samsara.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. But oftentimes we don't, without really understanding what samsara is, then the wish is very wishy-washy. Like it's not very clear and precise.
Yeah.
So that's the whole purpose of this illustration, and the explanations that go along with the illustration are for getting a more precise idea of what samsara is and how it works, and thereby generating a wish. Well, because before we have the wish to be free from it, we have to ask the question, is it really possible to be free from it, right? If it's not possible to get out of it, then wishing to get out of it is not really going to get us anywhere. So the really important thing is it possible to be free from samsara? So throughout this session, and then if you come to the sessions tomorrow, you should have a skeptical approach and think, what? That's why I started off in the meditation with these questions, like, when did this life begin? When did the first moments of experience, and where did that experience come from? That consciousness come from? What are the things that gave rise to and the larger question I didn't really ask, but is helpful to think about, is why did we take rebirth in this way? The way that we exist, with this kind of body and this kind of mind and this kind of experience of life that we have. Like, why is it that we experience life in the way we do? And then the second set of questions more about the future. Like, after we die, does my stream of consciousness continue or not, right? So if we think it doesn't, then this whole explanation is not really going to be very helpful for you, right? But if you think it does, then the next question comes, well, is there anything I can do to determine what sort of experience I'll have after this life, right? So again, that's what this whole diagram, instead of explanations, is addressing those questions, right? Yeah.
So it seems in Buddhism, it's a kind of a long-term goal.
Yeah, very much.
For future lives.
Mm-hmm.
But so, what can we do in this lifetime
Mm-hmm.
that we will see a difference in our lives this lifetime? A little bit freedom from samsara, a little
Yeah.
bit, you know, or is it a long term, or is it?
No, if you're not seeing some result in this life, like then there's something wrong. Like you should see results just in this life, some difference. The main thing is just to be kind-hearted, to be less self-centered and more concerned about the welfare of others as well.
Which should have results.
Yeah, you should see a change in your own attitude and in your satisfaction with your life. If you really practice, like on a daily basis, trying to generate a kind heart, trying to think about your interdependence with others, trying to generate more concern for the welfare of others, you should see a change within 1 month. If you really do on a daily basis, and go along with practicing meditation and trying to generate these sort of positive attitudes and a positive outlook in this way. And yeah, just being more kind-hearted. You should be able to see a change within a month, 2 months. If you don't see a change within 6 months, then you should ask for your money back. Then something either the instruction you're following is not right, or you're not following it right, or there's something else going on. I mean, because it's not that meditation is a panacea for everybody. I mean, for some people, meditation can actually cause more. I mean, if you have like serious psychological problems, it can cause more like disturbance in the mind. But for the ordinary person with the ordinary kind of mental health, then you should see improvement. But we're out of time now, so let's stop here. So we'll continue tomorrow at 10:30 tomorrow morning. And again tomorrow, so again we'll do some explanation, some question and answer, some meditation, and then I'm hoping to have a discussion group tomorrow after lunch, where you can just discuss with each other out of the watchful eye of the teacher. Okay, but now let's just briefly dedicate whatever merit we've created. So we can just use a couple verses. We'll use one verse on page 99 in this prayer book. If you'd like to read along, there's one verse of dedication we'll use. Oh, actually, we won't use that verse. Let me find a different verse. One minute, find a different verse. Oh yeah, on page 235. Let's use one verse from page 235. 235. Okay, so think of all the merit we've created and rejoice. Think how wonderful it is. And then all the merit created by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all holy beings everywhere, the past, the present, and the future, and all the merit created through all the virtuous deeds of every sentient being everywhere. And think how wonderful it is. Try to rejoice. And so that the force of all this positive energy, may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering and have every well-being up to full enlightenment. Especially may all of our spiritual teachers have long and stable lives, and may the teachings of Buddha spread wherever they can benefit sentient beings. So we can read this verse together if you like on 235. Due to the merit of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into the enlightened state. So we'll stop there. So thank you very much
Thank you
for
very
your
much.
participation.
That's it.